Volunteer recognition. Be bold. Use the media to tell your story. Hello, Canadians. We're speaking to you about National Volunteer Week, and as it's coming up very quickly, we're hoping that what we can share with you today about media may help you profile volunteers in your community. I'm Karen Lynch. I'm the Executive Director of Volunteer Alberta and a board member of Volunteer Canada, and today we are joined by a very special contributor, Lee Rose from Charity Village, who is on the media side. So let's go through our presentation this morning and click along with me. Volunteer recognition. As everybody knows, there is a huge need to be able to say thank you. During National Volunteer Week, we take this opportunity to say thank you to the millions of Canadians who every day make this an incredible country to live in that's recognized around the world as a place where community engagement makes a huge difference to our quality of life. During National Volunteer Week, we focus on thanking volunteers. But that should only be the focus during that week. No, the answer is we should be doing this all the time. It's that we're able to bring the nation's attention to volunteers during National Volunteer Week. It's essential that the leadership that they acknowledges the importance of volunteers. Too often what we hear is, oh yes, volunteers, how nice, in the same kind of frame of mind that we talk about motherhood and apple pie. But in the 21st century, if you take an integrated human resource approach and look at all your resources, whether it's paid or unpaid, as essential to moving your mission forward, that heightens the importance of National Volunteer Week. Today we're going to talk about 6 things. We're going to talk about understanding the media, developing your messages, dealing with reporters, successful relationships, advice on pitching your stories from Lee Rose at Charity Village, and a little bit about interview techniques. We've got about 20 or 25 minutes, so we're going to go through this very quickly. If you have any questions, you're welcome to ask either Lee or I at any time via our email. So a few things about the media. If you haven't met any of the journalists of the media lately, you may not know very much about them, but they certainly have changed from the days when we thought that they sat in a very crowded newsroom with smoke making the air blue and pencils and writing away copy after copy about emerging stories of the day. Journalists now are curious storytellers. They're interested in the world around them. They're truth seekers. They have an innate need to find out what the truth and what the facts are. They're human. Sometimes they make mistakes. And what's really important, particularly in the nonprofit sector that doesn't particularly pay attention to the norms of an 8-to-5 job, the media does have a life outside their work. And so understanding their deadlines and what drives them is really important. And the most essential thing to understand is if it's a 6 o'clock news, don't phone them at 5 minutes to 6 and expect them to be paying attention because they are very deadline driven. One of the opportunities I have as Executive Director of Volunteer Alberta is to sit on the Edmonton Journal Community Advisory Newsroom. And that has been a real insight into how they get their information in the day and age of a very consolidated media market. In other words, it used to be that radios were owned by one company and newspapers owned by another company and TV by another. And that's not the same anymore. And with the very small concentration of owners, they share their information quite a bit between the 3 different mediums. And then, of course, there's social media, too. So a few things. Characteristics of the news. They use an inverted format. In other words, they use the important details summarized at the beginning of the story. That's why if you read newspapers and you read any articles or you listen to opening lines, you'll understand that those opening sentences are really important in terms of the reader's attention or the listener's attention and following through. So they have the most important details at the very beginning. Who, what, when, where, why, and finally how. So when you're pitching your story, and Lee will speak about that later, it's very important to use exactly the same kind of approach with your pitch, which is get the catch, the important details. Don't call up and say, the Cancer Society is hosting an event on Saturday, April the 14th at 2 o'clock p.m. at the Elk Senior Citizens Home in Manyberries, Alberta. That's not the hook. What the hook is, what is it you're doing it for? Why would you be doing this? All those other details are important in terms of making sure that it can be covered, but it's not the hook, and we'll get to that afterwards. Episodic, loose ends followed up later. What the media sees is they look at what's called an arc. In other words, the lifetime of the story. How long can it stay on the front page of the paper? So with the recent stories on a crime, think of the honor killings in southern Ontario. That story had an arc for weeks and weeks and weeks, not only from the very beginning of the incident, but also the trial that just recently finished with a guilty verdict. That's what's called an arc. If the events that you ask them to come and cover normally don't have an arc, they're usually the interest for 24 hours. But if you can interest the media in a story that has an ongoing story, that's certainly a different kind of interest for them. Deadline driven. So you know that, and Lee can speak about this too, you know that deadlines at the newspaper are usually there's one in the middle of the afternoon, there's one in the later afternoon, and then there's one in the evening also. Here in Alberta, the story is that there were 4 editions for the October 2nd, 2011 Edmonton Journal and Calgary Herald, simply because the decision of the leadership race, the one that elected Alison Redford to the premier position, wasn't resolved until 2 o'clock in the morning. So the first edition went out with no winner. The second edition went out with the results of the first ballot. The third edition went out with the results of the second ballot, but there was an argument, or not an argument, there was a decision to review the ballots once again, and that final decision wasn't until close to 2 o'clock. So depending on where you were in Alberta to get the newspaper, you would have gotten different headlines. Local first. That is certainly drawing the mantra. If you are in a non-large urban center, if you're somewhere other than in the big urban centers, you have local newspapers, maybe they're weekly newspapers, that are focused on their information that's in their local communities. So you already have an advantage. Key messages. Know what it is that you're going to say. So when you pick up the telephone, if you're going to have the conversation with them, or you send out a news release that tells you all the details first, without that hook, without that interest, I think that you're going to find that your work in developing key messages goes to naught. Here in Alberta, the Edmonton Journal basically responds to 1 in 60 faxed requests for media coverage. That's 1 in 60. So that's a lot of work that's going into attracting media attention that's just not being fruitful. So we're also going to talk a little bit about how you can increase your chances with that. So develop your key messages, make sure you've got your specific objectives in mind, and figure out ahead of time what is the net impression you want. If you are sending a fax or an email with an attached PDF, figure out exactly what you want the media to do afterwards. They're probably going to pick this piece of paper up and look at it in 5 seconds and decide whether or not there's something in there that they want to cover. Is there a key message? So you can see how important that is. To develop ahead of time, plan it out, develop a key message map. There's a longer version of this presentation of Lee's and mine available on the Volunteer Alberta website with instructions on how to go about developing a key map. Key messages. Boldly state who and what you are. Be bold. If I say this to the people that I work with, look at the Oprah magazine and look at the cover of Oprah magazine and look how they encapsulate in 3 or 4 words the theme or what they want to attract you to read a story, to buy the magazine. Think about that kind of very simple key messaging when you're actually trying to attract attention to your particular cause or your event. Express the value and benefit to your audience. In other words, help them answer the question, what's in it for me? Show you care. Make sure that you have attended to all the details that the media will need. And for goodness sakes, use concise and plain language. If you're going to use an abbreviation, make sure you tell them what it is. If you're talking about something that's very complicated, if you're a nonprofit organization working with environmental issues and there are words in there that are not in the normal lexicon, make sure that you try to find another word for plain language. If there isn't one, then explain what it is that you are saying. Ask yourself, in this case, why is volunteer recognition important and relevant? Why should anybody care that you're recognizing your value of your volunteers at this particular time during National Volunteer Week? What's the impact in real life? In other words, rather than saying that 1.2 million Albertans or 25 million Canadians are volunteering. Bring it down to something how it impacts an individual's life in the community or in the broadcast range that the media is going to cover. What does the average person need to know? In other words, why would someone out there listening pay attention to what you're trying to say? This is an opportunity for you to be able to demonstrate to the media that there are going to be people that are listening and paying attention to what they are saying in their particular stream of media. What are the benefits to volunteering, and what will be accomplished? Make sure that you've got those in your mind. Speak them out loud to yourself and to people you're working with so that you can be crisp and enunciate exactly what the point is very quickly. We've got an example here that you can read through. Here's something that a volunteer was recognized on a provincial scale. This basically says, the story is, after years of volunteering, they're going to say how many years, what was he volunteering for, what's the award for. Gee, he got it for being the Recreation Volunteer Recognition Award, only one of 4 Albertans. The Reed of the Wetaskiwin County has written to him, telling him what it is, and this is an example for you to be able to share with your on your news releases exactly what it is in regards to what the media needs to know and also what the audience needs to know. Tips for pitching a story. Going to help you how you actually go and pitch a story. You get less chance to do that than we used to, simply because the concentration of the media now has changed how many journalists are actually available to pick up the telephone and listen to you pitch the story. So one of the things is it makes sense that you develop relationships with the media before you need to go to them. And also, on the other hand, you also need to be prepared to be available at a moment's notice should the media be calling you. So part of what you need to learn is the comforts you need to be able to answer questions succinctly, paying attention to your key message. So let's go through this just a little bit here now. Story ideas. So for National Volunteer Week, what you want to do in preparation for the week is develop a list, just a short list, of volunteer recognition story ideas and hooks, things that you believe that would be of interest to the listeners and readers of the media. So you have to be able to sell it to the broker, and the broker in this point is the media. So think of some of the things that might work. Human interest angle, how someone benefited from the program or service. It's not so important that you say that the St. John's Ambulance had 2.3 million hours of volunteering to deliver first aid programming and first aid services across the country. What's really important to be able to make your point is that one of those 2.3 million hours saved Johnny's life at the annual boating regatta for the nonprofit society Ducks Swimming Down the River. It's really important to be able to take large numbers and be able to tell the story behind the numbers. It's easier for us to say 2.3 million hours, but that's not the story. That's not the human interest story. What did people do with those? How did people's lives change? What has happened in the community? Where will we have an environmental benefit because we had the Clean Up the River Valley Litter Day sponsored by the local Outdoors Limited Club? Where are they now stories? You could talk about the fact that a children's charity provided an opportunity for a child to go to Disneyland or Disney World as part of the Rainbow Wish a Dream or Rainbow Society work. Think about what you would do is if a year later you could follow up and that child was still alive and doing well and that the memories of that experience had sustained them. Great opportunity to be able to say, we need to provide more little Johnnies and little more Maries with these kinds of opportunities. Another one is Whole Family Volunteers for a Charity. That's a great one because it's a great photo op at the same time. Volunteer, mobilize the entire community. Make a simile. Say it's just like an old-fashioned barn raising. This is what happened when Habitat for Humanity put up a home in Silverwoods to be able to provide affordable housing for a mother with 4 children, all who had lost their home in a fire, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And you can make those kinds of stories, but always tell what pitches at heartstrings, okay? Photo opportunities. This is my opportunity to say to you, handing over a check is not a photo opportunity. Cutting a big red ribbon is not a photo opportunity. Photojournalists want to see something in action. They want their photo to be able to evoke a passion or a moment for the viewer that then transcends to the story that they're trying to tell. That makes then the copy attached to that story be totally compelling. But if what you think is that the latest check is going to be the news story of the day, most journalists don't want to do that anymore. It's just not convincing or compelling enough. The two-way benefit of volunteer engagement, that in itself is a story. Somehow people believe that volunteers are completely selfless, that they do this only for the good of the community. And yet statistic after statistic and story after story tells us that volunteers get as much or more of their engagement than the organization that they're volunteering for. Check that part of the story also. Talk about what it is that people have, not only in terms of the sentiment they have in doing good for a community, but the very real and tangible benefits of volunteering, which is increased experiences, opportunity to add to resumes for young people, skills that you bring to an organization. I've often said that the work that I do at Volunteer Alberta is only possible not because of the 3 pieces of paper I have on the wall, but because of the 36 years I've been volunteering in different organizations and what I have learned from that. That's why I can do my job here at Volunteer Alberta, not necessarily because of the academic training. And I don't think we talk about that enough as one of the benefits of volunteering. Make sure that you plan to succeed when you connect with the media. Practice, practice, practice. I learned a very valuable lesson years ago when I wanted to pitch a story, and my very experienced colleague said to me, why? And I answered the question, and then she said, why again? And she went through that 5 times until the final answer to the why was the distillation of exactly what would be of interest to the media. So practice that yourself if you don't have anybody you can do it with. Give yourself the first reason why you want it, why the story should be covered, and then ask yourself why. Ask yourself why again, and get down to the point that you can pitch this and you understand and you can convey to the media exactly what it is that they will benefit from by covering your story. Make sure that if your volunteer recognition story idea, make sure that you've got a backgrounder and fact sheet ready to go then. Too late. If you called the media, they accepted your story and said, yeah, send us the information. They mean now, not the next day, certainly because they'll miss deadlines, but also now means make sure that you've got their attention and you keep their attention because someone else is right behind you pitching their story also. Make sure you've got a very succinctly written background and fact sheet. Anticipate questions for the media. One of the things that the media often appreciates from Volunteer Alberta is when they call and they interview us, I often have the name and number and contact points ready for them to be able to talk to a second or third person about the story. It adds a different perspective for them. Normally what I will do is I will say to the media, I know that Jane Henry would also be interested in speaking to you. This is the reason why. Would you be interested? Fine. I will contact Jane and I'll contact you and get permission and I'll contact you back within 5 minutes. That has been very, very helpful and gets the media to realize that they can come back to you for that kind of expertise. What's your hook? In other words, what makes a good story? Well, as anybody remembers from their English 10, 11, and 12 in high school courses, you have to have a protagonist. You got to have a good guy. You got to have something that the audience cares about. Good guy doesn't actually have to be a person. A good guy could be a cause or a particular issue. Something has to happen to make that take action. There has to be something important at stake. That's why if you go back to my comments earlier that sending out a news release about the fact that you're going to have an event for the Cancer Society at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Maryberry, that's just not very compelling. If you were able to change that story to say that there is an opportunity to come and meet the people, the volunteers and the staff who are behind accomplishing something, behind the recovery of a 12-year-old child from a particular disease that they raised the money for, that is much more compelling than telling the media that you're going to have a news release at 12 o'clock in Maryberry. There's got to be trials and tribulations. You've got to be able to tell a story. Think of a good yarn. Think of all the good books that you read. There always has to be some kind of story. There has to be resolution to it. Something has to happen so that at the end, something is changed. There has to be a storyline all the way through it where you can tell the person to pay attention. In this day and age, with thousands and thousands and thousands of media and advertising messages bombarding you every single day in every single way, there has to be something compelling for you to be able to get your story across. When I talked about the third person, the third voice for credibility, that is very, very helpful because it gives the idea to the media that you have breadth and depth to your story also. I have said to the media, although they've never taken me up on it, should I come with you to visit Jane Henry, or do you want to have a three-way call? Most of the time that they'll say no, but you can always offer, that's for sure. Make sure that before you have the third voice answer the telephone to the media, that you've briefed them on your key messages. That should be part of your planning, so that they aren't taken by surprise and that they continue the storyline that you have created. And make sure that you're the detail person in between. Make it easy for the media. So here's a story. Okay, so we have in Alberta the Catholic Social Services. They have an annual fundraising campaign for 25 or 30 years now called the Sign of Hope campaign. You could basically have a story that says Catholic Social Services raised $50 million this year. Is that really the story? It could be. But the real story is what you do with the $50 million. And the story here is Marie, the former drug dealer, party animal, drug and alcohol addict, credits Catholic Social Services First Step program, a service for high-risk pregnant moms, with helping her deliver a healthy baby about a year ago. So obviously your story is going to be about her success and about what an environment, a safe environment this child is now living in because of the dollars that were donated to Catholic Social Services. You've got everything in this story. You've got a protagonist, you've got action, you've got a change point, you've got a resolution, and you've got photo ops. Here we go now, pitching to TV reporters. And I'm going to pass this over now to my very capable colleague, Lee Rose, at Charity Village. Lee.
Thanks very much, Karen. And yeah, talking about pitching, and I think, Karen, you mentioned earlier in terms of the convergence of media and how, it used to be very different when you pitched to TV and to radio and to newspapers. And now with media convergence things, a lot of these organizations are owned by the same entities. So rather than go through each of them exclusively, I'll look at how to, there are ways that you can pitch to television. You can also pitch to radio, and then also to traditional newspapers. And here I really focus, instead of the national, like National Post, Globe and Mail, those kinds of things, really focusing more on your local and regional news, because that's what people actually read. People live in very hyper-local environments. People respond to what happens in their backyard. So really focusing on those areas. And then not forgetting other media streams, so things like your own public service announcements in your own website, and the proliferation of social media as well, so using things like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube to get your message out there in the hands of potential influential bloggers or other new media types that can take your story in a different direction. So, I used to work in the sector in a communications role, and I was often pitching to media, and now sitting on the other side of the pitch deck, right? If I had the experience that I have now as an editor at Charity Village, back when I was working for a nonprofit, I would, have retailored some of my pitches to be a lot more compelling, as Karen had already mentioned. And the biggest piece of advice is it really is about relationships. So the blind email to someone who has the editor or journalist type title in their email doesn't really resonate, especially for me. With you're bombarded by pitches and story ideas that come into the inbox all day. What is it that really separates the wheat from the chaff there? And it's really important to take the time to create and build these relationships with writers, editors, reporters, and producers. And I'm really keen on editors and producers. This is a tip for, especially for radio and online publications, is there are editors, like at Charity Village, for example, we assign stories to writers. So if you build a relationship with a writer, that's great, but the editor and the producers in radio typically are the ones that guide how a story actually gets developed on the media side. So producers will typically do a lot of the legwork and a lot of the research on the story. So sometimes if you have a direct connection with that radio personality or that news reader, that's great. But it's really the producers, the people who are behind the scenes that you really need to build those relationships with. And it's really important. There are simple ways to build this relationship, and it doesn't have to be like, hey, Joe Editor, I want to build a relationship with you. It really is a lot more subtle than that, and it can be just being active in the space where they operate. So, for example, at Charity Village, if you follow Charity Village on Twitter or you comment on stories, things like that. So be active in the space where those media are participating, and that way your name will sort of have that recognition. You know, they say it takes sometimes 3 times before, you have to say something 3 times before someone hears you, and it's important to have that kind of visibility in the space so that people will start to pay attention to you. And I'm more apt to answer an email from someone who I've had a conversation with on Twitter or even on the telephone. And it's really important, too, to find out who covers your beat. So who are the kinds of people in the media that cover your kinds of stories? You're not going to be pitching your story to the sports desk or things like that. And that might seem like common sense, but take the time to look at those things. Read the newspaper in your community. Find out, the names of the journalists who are writing the kinds of stories that you want to get coverage, because typically people work a certain beat or they write a certain kind of story. So get to know who the contributors are in each of your different media outlets. Make a list of them, people who are in radio, in the news, like newsprint, or even online, and take the time to build those relationships. And again, it's really important to target your story to appropriate outlets. So if you're a local organization, pitch your local media first. If you're regional, pitch regional. And national coverage, you're not going to get lead story on the National with Peter Mansbridge, typically, for a good news story. It's very rare that that'll happen. And again, it's really resonating with your intended audience. If your donors and your supporters are local, really leverage your local community newspapers and your local media rather than trying to get something national coverage. Because while national coverage is great for a profile, if you're running really local stuff, the people who are most impacted for it are probably going to be least likely to see that content. So remember that aspect. And again, I'll go back to the community newspapers. Everyone reads their community newspapers. People write letters to the editor. That's another way to be involved as well, is to have that dialogue with the media. So if there's a story that's related to what your organization is doing, write a letter to the editor. That way your name gets out there in the media and in the community. And you can be leading a discourse on the topic, and then you have a lot more credibility and gravitas in your voice on that topic. And people might take you a little bit more seriously or be more apt to listen to a pitch from you because you're already engaged in that media space. And it's really important to keep those connections with your media contacts. So it might be an email here and there or a telephone call or, again, a response to a story. So keep that two-way communication open with your media whenever possible. And this one, I think, is really clear. It's really important to have an articulate and charismatic spokesperson. People typically default to the executive director being the spokesperson of an organization or a board chair. And while they're great leaders, they might not necessarily be the best person to speak on behalf of the organization in a different context. So especially, someone might be great on the radio, but they might get nervous in front of TV. So figure out who it is in your organization that is prepared to speak to the media, is confident enough to speak to the media, and has the skills and the ability to think on their feet. It's great if it's your executive director, but it's also good to have people and to give your program staff and the people who are implementing the programs and even your clients or your volunteers the latitude to speak on behalf of the organization and to really share that first-person account. Because as a member of the media, I want to get behind the corporate sort of position that a typical communications person would throw at me and really get to that human story of what's going on. And people will resonate with a real story of someone on the ground who's impacting change. So again, don't send scripted quotes or statements from your communications manager, and don't be afraid to have some fun. If you have a quirky personality or if you have something that's really unique about you, play that up, leverage that. It helps build your recognition in the sector and also in the media. Another word of advice is to ensure that your content is media ready. I think Karen already spoke to this a little bit, but with the pace of news at this point, with everything being available almost instantaneously, we can't be everywhere all at once. So really make it easy for your story to be covered. Well, so you can do that by providing photos, videos, audio clips, and along with your succinct and well-written pitch. So as much information as you can give me at the beginning is a lot more effective than spoon-feeding a little bit at a time or just sending me a fax copy of a press release. And here's the kicker too, and you'll be surprised at how often this isn't the case. But make sure your organization's website is up to date. If you're pitching a media story and the contact information on your website isn't up to date, or if you've recently moved and that hasn't been updated, I've sent writers to the wrong location because of information that's been on a website. So make sure that all that basic stuff is up to date and good to go on your website. That includes the information about your organization. So I don't know how many times you've gotten media coverage and have listened or read something and, oh, they got it wrong, or they didn't say it quite clearly enough about what the organization does. Make that boilerplate information, so that elevator pitch about what your organization is all about, really easy to read and easy to find on your website, so that the media are able to find it and use it and speak appropriately about what it is your organization does. And if you can, if you have a copy of your logo that's in a downloadable format on your website, as well as some pictures about your program. So whether you have a Flickr feed or something where you have some images that are already approved for use by the media, have those available on your website so people can download them and use them right away. And here, just a scenario here to talk about the examples of a good pitch or a bad pitch. So the setup is an organization serving youth at risk of homelessness is launching an innovative partnership with a private company to employ youth and provide earned income and practical learning and training opportunities, with the hope of placing 25 youth over the next 12 months. So you work for this organization who has this program, and you're pitching this story to me in the media. So here are some signs of a bad pitch. You send a fax copy of a press release with a canned statement from your board chair to a TV news outlet on a Friday afternoon. Not really a good idea. So it's not timely. And again, fax is probably not the best way to reach you. I don't even know the last time I checked my fax machine for news. So I would have used fax as the method of last resort. The other thing, too, that if your pitch focuses on your organization's history and not the new program. So if you go on and wax eloquent about the impact of your organization has had and how you've been there for 25 years and all these things, that's great, but that's not the story. That's really good background information, but the heart of the story is really the kids in the program right here, right now. And then the other thing, the only thing that's really useful about the pitch is that the reference to youth engagement in your organization's boilerplate. So if you're an organization that deals with youth engagement in those kinds of contexts, make sure that your collateral and all these pieces you're pitching to me reflect that part of your mission. So on the other side, here's some signs of a good pitch. Something that's clearly written and articulate and includes photos and quotes from impacted youth, and it's sent in advance of the launch. So we're going to do this launch of this event with the corporate partners 2 weeks from now. You send it to us and let us know that you want to keep it under wraps for now, but you send us an invitation under embargo, and we're interested to find out some more. That gives us the lead time to be able to really thoughtfully and properly cover your story. A lot of times organizations will hold on to information because they don't want to let it out of the bag before the media deadline. Media outlets tend to work with an embargo. They do it for the federal budget. They lock up all the journalists in a room to get the budget. They have it for 8 hours before it goes public, and that way they're able to thoughtfully and clearly draft a really great story that really speaks to what it is you're doing. So if you're going to issue stuff, you can do it under embargo and request that the media doesn't release it until a certain time. The other piece, too, to follow up if you're going to do it this way is to follow up 2 or 3 days before the event with additional information. Is there anything in terms of the location or the venue that the media person may require? And then if you're doing, this is an example of a corporate partnership. Now, don't forget, you're thinking of traditional media in terms of, newspapers, print, and radio or television. If you're leveraging your corporate partner as well, they have a PR machine and they have that kind of reach in the community and within the media to leverage as well. So that it's you telling the story, but it's also this corporate partner who can help tell the story as well. And again, these are very simple and obvious things, but they include links to your organization's website and social media profiles where you're already talking up the story. So create a little bit of buzz around this announcement so that people are excited about it, anticipating it. If it's on your Facebook, if it's on Twitter, and it's on your website, people are looking forward to this, and you're building that momentum and that story arc that Karen had talked about earlier. And really focus again on the impact the program has on 1 or 2 participants, as opposed to that faceless mob of 25 youth over 12 months. If you could really zone in on 1 or 2 specific people who have had a great impact or are really looking forward to how this program will turn their lives around, that is a much more compelling story than the broader numbers. And then once after the event goes on, to continue that arc, follow up, in 3 or 6 or 9 months, and say, look, we did this launch, this is the program, this is where we're at now, 6 months later. What's the impact? impact? How is this youth that we talked about 6 months ago doing now? And I think it's important to have that story, because people will remember and resonate that over time. And I think I'm going to pass it over back to Karen for some perspective on interviews from the organizational perspective.
Thanks very much, Lee. And you're right about faxes. When I was thinking about that afterwards, I thought, boy, is that ever showing my age when I said send a fax? You're absolutely right. Slap on me for even thinking that. General guidelines for media interviews. Here's a few things that you can do in your organization to be able to be ready, to be able to take advantage of all that you just learned from Lee. Here's the 5 W's. Make sure you've got your answers. Practice and practice and practice. Who's affected or involved? What happened? Concisely. When did it happen? Where did it happen? Why did it happen? What was the cause? That's sometimes a real difficult one to be able to nail down quickly. And how did it happen? One of the consultants that has advised me over the years in some of the media work that I've done always says to me, Karen, you keep going down the rabbit hole. And the rabbit holes is basically straying from the key message. And so we go through these 5 W's and 1 H several times before I could do any live interviews on TV or radio and before I pitch the story, because you've got to be very clear about what it is you're doing and not go down those rabbit holes. I've learned that to my peril. General tips. Here's a few things that if you're going to pitch the story, I'm sure that Lee would appreciate that everybody learns how to do this, because as someone who, as he said earlier, gets all kinds of pitches, learning how to get through the clutter is important. Never assume the news release was released, especially if you faxed it, because quite frankly, maybe they don't have a fax machine anymore. So make sure that you always follow up with a phone call and say, but before you say, hi, I'm Karen Lynch from Volunteer Alberta, say, hi, I'm calling about a news release. Is this a good time to talk to you? Because if you're phoning around one of their deadline hours or you're phoning around a live broadcast, obviously that's not a good time. So increase the chances that you are going to be able to have a chance to talk with that reporter by observing the deadlines and the news that's happening around during the day. Obviously, during 9/11, it probably wouldn't have been a very good day to be able to phone and say, gee, I have a charity event in my community that I'd like you to cover. So be sensible about what else is happening. When I worked at a large organization about 8 years ago, we had a launch of a spring campaign that was innovative. It had incredible technology, and it was a day of a major disaster here at one of our oil fields. So obviously it got absolutely no coverage whatsoever. Be brief when you call. Ask if they need more information, and offer a photo opportunity. Lee talked earlier about having photos available, and those are really important. Sometimes in the larger centers, they'll want to send a photographer along, but make sure that you tell them that you do have some photos for them. It's totally up to them whether they want to. Obviously, theirs are going to be better than yours by far. Make sure that you don't just start having the relationship when you need something. The value of networking is hugely underappreciated in the nonprofit sector. We often think that those terms, networking, that belong to the corporate sector. They are hugely important, and they're no more important than when you want to be able to connect with media. So make every effort to be able to introduce yourself, make sure that they've got your contact points so that they can call you if they need you. Consistency is everything. Lee spoke about making sure that you had a downloadable logo to be able to send them. Make sure your key messages are consistent. Make sure that everything is up to date. Because, quite frankly, I don't think you get second chances with the media if you don't do it right the first time. When you're getting ready for your media interview, whether it's a media interview that you plan or a media interview where they have called you, it's quite okay if the media calls you. Ask what the subject is about. Ask them when their deadline is. And if it's possible, ask them if you can call them back in 3 or 4 minutes. That's about all you've got to be able to put your thoughts in order to get your key message organized. So when Lee was speaking earlier about having all of this ready, it's important to do that. Make sure you have your key messages in decreasing order of importance and your supporting points. Rehearse to yourself, rehearse to your colleagues, rehearse to the volunteers. Make sure that you can do it. And as I just said, never take the media call without preparation. Avoid the jargon, the acronyms. We are a sector that is full of acronyms. I think we have 2 pages of acronyms that we give to our board members in their orientation package, technical terms. Don't repeat negative statements. This isn't the place to start throwing negatives about another organization or another person. That's not the way this goes. If part of your facts and part of your key messages need to be related to what we talked about earlier, making sure you have a protagonist, making sure you have an arc, making sure that you have some kind of change that's happened because of the story you want them to cover. And nothing is off the record. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Unless the reporter has been your best man at your wedding or is the godfather of your child, I would say that I have never yet believed that nothing is off the record. So make sure that you've got that firmly in your mind. Basically, media relations is part of your communication package, part of your public relations tool. You are developing quality long-term relationships with the people you want to be listening to your story and the people who are conveying your story. And the time to start those media relations is now before you need them. So at the beginning, when Lee and I started our webinar with you about 20 minutes ago, we said we were going to kind of cover a number of things. This has been a very quick overview, and there's more and longer presentations on the Volunteer Alberta website, and there's also a tremendous amount of help that you can have from Volunteer Canada. Volunteer Canada, although they can't be writing your news releases and that for you, are providing these kinds of opportunities to be able to prepare for National Volunteer Week. And so what we talked about today is make sure you set your objectives very clearly for what you want through the media interview, that your relationships are built, that you're not scrambling at the last minute, not knowing who it is that you need to speak to. Make sure you've got newsworthy story ideas. Remember, passing checks, presenting checks, or cutting ribbons is not particularly a news story idea. Think about it from your point of view. What is it that you would want to listen to that would make you pay attention amongst the myriad number of requests for your time? Making sure you have a third voice that they can contact adds credibility and interest and shows depth. Create a buzz to special events. If you're going to have special events, make sure that you do it well. Make sure that if you're inviting the media, that there's somebody there to host them and make sure they get all their information. Make sure that the special event you're organizing and that you want media coverage for is respects deadlines around media. Make sure you got your key messages, your message map. Prepare for media questions. Get somebody to start asking you questions and verbally out loud start responding to them and make sure that if there's any gaps in your knowledge that you fill those. Use proven interview techniques. And so the importance of learning about the media management and learning how to communicate, there are 3 or 4 extra resources here for you that have been recommended. And as I said, Volunteer Canada has a tremendous amount of information for you as well. With that, Lee and I would like to thank everyone for listening, thank Volunteer Canada for asking us to present to you today, and of course our sponsors, the Investors Group. Thank you.